Okay, so let's talk about a book that became more than just a bestseller. It was a full-blown phenomenon. But what happens when a feel-good memoir, this supposed love letter to life, starts to raise some pretty serious red flags for people?
So, this is how Matthew McConaughey himself pitches it. He calls his book Greenlights a love letter to life. It's this collection of stories and wisdom that's supposed to help you catch more of those green lights, those yes moments in your own life.
But then, over on the internet, a whole different conversation started bubbling up. It all kicked off with a simple question on Reddit that made a lot of people pause and take a second look at McConaughey's philosophy, and suddenly they were seeing a lot of red flags where everyone else just saw green.
All right, so before we dive into all that criticism, we've got to understand just how massive this book actually was.
I mean, it was an absolute monster hit. According to Forbes, Greenlights sold over 300,000 print copies in just the first half of 2021. That's not even counting digital or audiobooks. It was topping bestseller lists for months. It was a publishing powerhouse for sure. And the praise? Oh, it was just overwhelming. Reviewers, readers, everyone seemed completely captivated. They were calling it wise, honest, even saying he was a genius at living. It really felt like everybody was on board with this book.
But, as that one Reddit user found out when they were listening to the audiobook with McConaughey's super charming narration and all, some of the stories he tells start to feel, well, a little off. So the first thing that really jumped out to the person who posted this was the way McConaughey talks about his parents' really violent relationship. We're talking throwing plates, breaking each other's fingers, and he seems to frame it all not as abuse, but as their own special kind of love. And then you've got this story about him stealing someone else's poem for a writing contest. He kind of laughs it off and remembers it as this great lesson his mom taught him. Hey, it's not stealing if you don't get caught. And it didn't stop there. Even the story of how he pursued his wife Camila felt kind of off to some readers. It involves tricking her into staying the night at his place and then trying to sneak into her room twice. The poster just described it as cringeworthy. But maybe the most jarring thing that another user pointed out was this. He mentions being sexually assaulted while he was passed out, but he discusses it with this really bizarre, casual detachment. It's like he's talking about a minor inconvenience before he just moves on. Okay, but this is where the whole conversation gets really interesting. Because for every single person who saw a red flag, there was another reader who offered a totally different way of looking at these exact same stories. And this, right here, this table, really gets to the heart of the other side of the argument. The idea is that his stories aren't him endorsing bad behavior at all. Instead, they're describing this powerful coping mechanism he built to survive a pretty chaotic childhood. Notice the little details, like how he said, "We called it love, not it was love." And one commenter just nailed it, right? They said that the main theme of the whole book is his effort to reframe everything that happens to him so he never has to see himself as a victim. That humor, that constant search for adventure, it's all part of a mental framework he built to hold himself together. So, to really get why he tells his stories this way, you gotta understand the philosophy behind the whole book, the art of Greenlights itself. So the whole idea of the book, its main concept, is about learning to recognize and even create these moments where life is basically yelling go at you. It's this philosophy that teaches you that even the red lights and the yellow lights, the obstacles and the pauses in life, they can all eventually turn green if you just learn how to approach them. And this list, it really shows you how deliberate he was about all of this. He wrote these goals down way back in 1992, right after his career was starting and just after his dad had died. And it's this blueprint for his life, mixing totally normal goals like become a father with really weird ones like be an egotistical utilitarian, which, by the way, he defines as doing things for himself that just happen to benefit other people too. It's all part of the master plan. So this whole debate really comes down to a bigger, more fundamental question, a question about memoirs and autobiographies themselves. And this was basically the main pushback on that Reddit thread. A lot of defenders were just asking, look, it's his life, and he's telling it in his own words. What exactly are people expecting him to do differently? What right does a reader really have to demand that he rewrite his own past to fit their comfort level? Which brings us to the core conflict. So what's an author's job here? Is their duty to be completely honest to their own memory of their life, no matter how messy or uncomfortable that is for us? Or
Should they frame their memories in a way that meets our modern expectations for how trauma is supposed to be talked about? And that's really the question that Greenlights leaves you with. It kind of forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves not just about how an author tells their story, but about how we, as readers, choose to listen.